Crash Bandicoot was one of my first series of games that I remember playing as a kid. I was enthralled by the striking visuals and the difficulty. Though to be fair, any game would have been hard for me at that age. One of my favorite memories as a kid was getting a multi-tap and playing Crash Team Racing with my three brothers. So just like many others, seeing one of the boulder levels in Uncharted 4 was really exciting, though initially the assumption was that Naughty Dog would be in control of Crash Bandicoot once more. When we found out later that the original three games were being completely remade, I was ecstatic. This was a series I had loved and seen mishandled and withered away through the years, and finally, we would see a modern return to the franchise's best entries through the hands of Vicarious Visions. I should point out that recently I replayed the original games on the PlayStation 3. A lot of people have had the mindset that this was only nostalgia driving the interest in these remakes, and perhaps our memories of them are disillusioned by time. But I'd argue that even the original games hold up, both visually and gameplay-wise. The controls felt a bit stiff and dated, but for the most part they feel fine to play with the exception of a couple levels. This begs the question though, why remake them if the originals hold up? That was brought up in discussion often leading up to the release too. For one, even if the graphics age decently for their time, that doesn't mean they look good compared to things now, but that's obvious, right? The idea is to reintroduce the series to new people and modernize it, and what's better than to do that than with the original games, the most loved in the series. Old fans can relive them in a modern version, and gamers who never played them before can now. It's not unfair to assume that a lot of younger gamers wouldn't care for such dated games, though I'm sure many would. Basically, people don't play older games as much as newer games, so even if the older ones hold up well enough, people aren't going to be playing them. Now that the remakes are out, and have been received better than most probably expected, people new and old are talking about Crash Bandicoot, and Activision knows that there's definitely support for a new title. Though, I think anyone who knew what Crash Bandicoot was before these remakes would have supported a new game. Let's get into the actual game. I will say from the start that I am a fan of the remakes, definitely. The reimagined visuals are stellar, and they've done a great justice to the original games. The controls feel pretty similar to the originals, staying true, just like Vicarious Visions wanted, with the exception of Crash's collider being changed, which kind of increased the difficulty in a frustrating way, but that's not really a big complaint in my mind. The question that does come to mind for me, though, is should the controls have been made as close to the originals? For a lot of people, the answer will be yes, because fans basically want the old game with new graphics and nothing more. But in the end, if you're reviewing a game, can you forgive a game that has less than perfect controls just because they were going for that? It's kind of hard. On the one hand, I can't fault Vicarious Visions because they wanted to stay true to the original games, and that meant the controls being just as stiff as they once were. On the other hand, that doesn't mean they felt good. I don't want to overstate that though. I fully completed all three games, including the Platinum Relics and all trophies for the PS4. I really enjoyed them. It wasn't just nostalgia, I think they're fun and the difficulty is refreshing. A lot of platforms in the last few years have been very easy. But again, just because the controls being old school is deliberate doesn't mean it's good in a critical sense. It's like if someone was deliberately making bad tasting food just because it's like their mom used to make or something. It still tastes like shit. Before I go on too long about the controls though, I don't think they're bad. They're just not super great compared to more recent 3D platformers, and the decision to make them feel just like the originals can still be criticized and viewed badly even if it's on purpose. Another thing that makes these hard to judge is that most of the game design is the same as the originals, naturally. So do I criticize Naughty Dog for the things I don't like when this is a remake? Well sure, but should that let Vicarious Visions off the hook? Again, just because something was like that in the original and you want to keep it that way, that doesn't mean it's good. That's just in general for anyone though. I actually don't have a lot of criticisms for the game design. Most of my complaints are towards Crash 3 in that regard. The flying levels weren't very fun. They're also very easy, almost not even worth playing. The motorcycle levels, while very interesting, have terrible controls, and the same goes for the underwater levels. I would describe them both as stubborn. Even though I just said it's hard to judge this game when most of the ideas are from Naughty Dog's originals, I'm just going to speak as though the remakes are their own thing for the rest of this. For the same reason that deliberately bad things are still bad, good things are still good, even if they're based almost completely on someone else's groundwork. As a musician, good soundtracks are always a huge bonus to me. Though I should state that a game doesn't need a good soundtrack, or one at all, for it to be good. And you could take out a great composition from a game and 9 times out of 10, it will not affect the game. The rare cases being soundtracks that help build the feel of a level or narrative, or the other obvious, rhythm games. I would say that these remakes are games that would not really suffer with no soundtrack at all. Sure, going from music to no music might sound odd and empty, but I would argue that's because you're already used to it. It would just need some light ambient sound and the levels would feel fine. That being said, all these games have great soundtracks. Not just the music actually, the whole sound design. The box breaking, jumps, running, bouncing, everything. It all sounds really good, and having so many different songs for the different levels adds to the different experience every level brings. There isn't a whole lot to say about the visuals aside from they're beautiful. And they really are. There's stellar environments, and there's a wide variety of them too. Crash's model has never looked better, even comparing it to other models when they came out for their time. I would argue the same thing as soundtracks though. You can have really basic backgrounds and visuals in general, and it wouldn't take a lot from the game. It's mostly about the platforming and actual gameplay.
Games are supposed to be about the gameplay.
Yeah, what he said.
Yes, but you have to understand the difference between a linear platformer and an open-world game like Horizon Zero Dawn, for instance. Crash isn't there to immerse you. That said, I say all that like I don't like when a game I play has great graphics. The work they put into the graphics is absolutely a plus, and it does make the levels feel better to go through. In the end though, games like Crash do come down to the actual gameplay. I've spent a good amount of this video talking about the controls feeling a bit stiff like the originals, wondering if they should have kept that the same. I never actually gave that an answer. This is another hard one though, because my answer is yes, I'm glad they kept it the same. But the reason that's hard is another question. Am I just saying that because of nostalgia, like I want it to feel like when I was a kid? Honestly, that is probably why. Is it fair for me to say that it was a bad decision to keep them so close to the originals, even though I'm glad they did it? Probably not, but what the hell do I know? But even after saying all that, I don't think the controls are bad by any stretch. I think they felt fine enough to enjoy the challenge to the game without it feeling overly frustrating or unfair. It could have been made a bit better. There is a lot of precision jumping, particularly in Crash 1, that tends to be on the annoying side. I found that they are mostly skill-based though, in that you can always get good enough to overcome them. Ultimately, I didn't find them to hinder me too much, considering I did end up getting Platinum Relics in all 3 games. It's important to consider that Relics, though, and high school playing aren't going to be all that important to a lot of players. Many just want to beat the game at their own pace, or are even fine with getting Silver Relics, and the controls definitely don't get in the way of that. It's pretty clear that Vicarious Visions did put a lot of care into these remakes, though. It recaptures the spirit of the original games really well, while still having their own mark on it. The addition of time trials to Crash 1 and 2, as well as the ability to play as Coco for the majority of the levels in each game, were really great. But, let's answer one of the most important questions for a game like this. How much game is there? I would say there's a great amount of total content, especially when you factor in the price. The games altogether took me about 40 to 50 hours or so to totally complete, most of that having to learn how to complete the levels in Crash 1 and 2 more effectively to get Platinum Relics. For $55 Canadian, 40 to 50 hours is an incredible amount of time played. Arguably though, that's not the greatest metric for a game like this, since I wanted to fully complete everything in it as a big fan of the series. Quite a lot of that time played can actually be chalked up to replaying certain levels for hours each due to trying to get these relics. Realistically, if you wanted to get to the final boss of each game without doing all else, probably be about 20 hours or more depending on your ability at the game. But even then, 20 hours for a $55 game where the majority of that game is pure, unfiltered fun, that's a pretty great price. Personally, I would have paid a full $80 for this game, but I can't say that would have been reasonable, speaking outside of being a fan of the originals. All in all, I just really like the games. For reviews in general, I've always found scores to be kind of stupid. Not just because they tend to be inconsistent with the critiques actually presented, but because it always seems that the score below 6 are reserved for games that people find truly abysmal, and those games usually get like a 1 or 2. There's not usually a lot of 3, 4, 5. In my mind, a 5 out of 10 would be an okay game, something I would play through once and not mind it, but would likely not play it again. If I were to give games a score, it would be based on that metric, where a 1 is absolute trash, and I can't even think of a game that would fit that. And a 10 out of 10 would be almost as uncommon as a 1. It's also important to note that scores shouldn't be consistent through different genres. I'm not a giant fan of racing games, but if I were to play one that I thought on a technical and gameplay level for a racing game was very good, I would say give it an 8, for example. But if I were to give something like Metal Gear Solid 5 an 8 out of 10, does that mean I think those games are on an equal level? Within the context of their own genre, perhaps, but it all depends on what you want and what the developer was going for. Even if I think MGS5 has way more content and a better experience, that doesn't matter to someone who sits down and just wants to race, and that's all the developers set out to do. This is why I find scores kind of stupid to begin with, because they make it seem like games that can barely even be compared are on the same scale, and they also serve as a deterrent for watching the actual critique and just getting a condensed review in the form of a number. That said, while I still find them stupid, hopefully with the idea of scores not mattering when compared to games that aren't similar, I feel I might as well give a score based on my aforementioned metric, where 5 is an okay game that I'd probably not revisit to give people an idea of how I actually felt it past all the criticisms. I'd give the Crash and Sane Trilogy an 8 out of 10. Really fun, challenging gameplay with a solid soundtrack and great visuals, and I know I'll replay it more than once over the next couple of years.